Chronicles 21:14 through 17. And the Lord unleashed an epidemic on Israel. 70,000 Israelites died. So what happened here is this is a result. David in the chapter previous, well, no, in this chapter, numbered the people. So by doing that, he was putting faith in the numbers of the people rather than putting faith in God. As we see in the first verse in chapter 21 how Satan enticed him, so he's tempted by Satan to do this. So David takes these numbers, and then later in verses previous, the prophet goes to David and gives him a choice. Either you can have famine, you can have your enemies take you by the sword, or you have to deal with me. Let's see. And so it's 3 years of famine, 3 months of disaster at the hands of the enemies, or 3 days of the Lord's fury being poured out. And David, knowing God's grace, and God's very gracious, and trusting Him more than he does with the enemies and famine, he decides to take the Lord's fury rather than take anything else. And so now this is what's happening. The Lord's pouring out His fury because of David's sin. Next, God sent the angel to Jerusalem to destroy it. But as he was about to destroy it, the Lord looked down and felt sorry about the calamity. And He said to the destroying angel, "Enough now, hold your hand." The angel of the Lord was standing by the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Now we see David's kind of right to choose the fury of the Lord, because we see mercy here, because the angel was keeping on going to destroy, and of course the angel was in line with God's will, which is why he stopped. There's also an important part about this threshing floor. This threshing floor was kind of a place where David made a covenant with the Lord. He really, truly just decided that the Lord was his, and he was going to be made a full commitment to the Lord. So by doing this, God don't forget things, but this is a place that symbolized that covenant. And so by that, it's kind of like it's more the angel stopped at this point to remind David of why the angel was stopping. You know, God knew all of what was going on, and certain times God allows us to remember certain milestones He put in our life, to remember our connection with Him. David knew he messed up, and David knew that punishment was to be done, but David also knew that the Lord was merciful. His enemies would not be. Famine would be devastating, considering they had no time to prepare for food. They were flourishing, so they wouldn't have, prepared for it. Things were well because of David's certain commitment to the Lord. So he knew that he could trust the Lord and have mercy because of the commitment the Lord made through him. We see with Saul back in 1 Samuel how God makes a commitment to Saul, just to Saul, not necessarily his sons, because that never happens, and God always keeps His word, but Saul turns to the Lord. David, each time he falls to a sin, we see David's heart being repented. The prophet went to Saul just as much like they did to David each time he messed up. But Saul's attitude was different than David's was. Saul's was making excuses. David's was repenting and trying to make things right with the Lord, trying to get back where he was. And that was the difference. Because none of us are going to be perfect. None of us are going to live perfect lives. We're all going to mess up. It's what we do after we mess up that really counts. Are we going to keep running away from the Lord, or do we come back to Him? And that's why David's kingly line remained, because he kept coming back to the Lord. David, rising his eyes, saw the angel of the Lord standing between the earth and the heaven, and drawn sword in his hand stretched out towards Jerusalem. And David and the elders that then put on sackcloth and fell on their faces. So they're doing a period of mourning. They're just not mourning the losses of the people, but they're mourning the wrong that was done for God to send this judgment out. Jerusalem was, at this point in time, the capital. It was also the place where the tabernacle would be built, the temple would be built. At this point, I don't think the temple's actually in Jerusalem yet, but it's still a very important city. It's where David's set up as king at this point. And so for God to attack it kind of would leave Israel in a place where they'd be weak towards the enemy, although God would protect them because of what David chose to be attacked by God, which kind of, when God gives us a choice, He ain't going to allow Him to pour out His fury on us and then have our enemies attack us too. I believe that because of David's choice, that while the fury was being poured out on him from God, he was going to protect and prevent the enemies or famine from coming to him. But so they're doing a period of mourning and humbling themselves before God here, which when we sin, this is exactly what we should do. We should grieve over our sin, turn it to God, and be sorrowful, and allow Him to not only just take us from it, but to allow us to grow from it, to learn from it. And David said to God, "Did I not order the people to be counted? I was the one who sinned and actually committed the wrong. But these, the flock, what have they done? The Lord my God, let your hand lie heavy on me and my family, and spare your people from the plague." Now this is very bold of David. David's realizing, because he's in place of king and authority, this is right why the entire nation's being attacked. But David's taking, after seeing this fury poured out and all these people dying, 70,000 dying, David realizes, okay, we don't need no more bloodshed. It's my fault, put it out on me. Which we'd see later through the book of Kings and through Chronicles, that there was kings that rebelled. We also see how David's life after this point, his family was always in chaos because of this. But David knew that it was for him to deal with it. He was the one that counted the people. He was the one that had it ordered. He was the one that needed to pay for it. And oftentimes, we see even in the fall, where in Genesis 3, where they're placing blame on each other rather than accept the blame in themselves. You know, when we mess up, when we sin, we should be willing to take the blame and not put it off on anybody else, and also take the consequences that God or anybody else may bring to us because of that wrongdoing. Because if we're not willing to do that, then most likely we're going to not fully turn from it, not fully grow from it, not truly be repentant at heart like God would want us to be.